what's happening, everybody? It's time for another edition of the Orangebloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum. That's Anwar Richardson. Do us a solid, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave any comments in the comments section that you might want to leave us. And while you're there, go ahead and click the bell, get the notification, so every time Anwar and I release a video, it's there for you. It lets you know, come watch me, come listen to me. We're going to either make you laugh or make you cringe or do both sometimes at the same time. We're talking about Evan Stewart's commitment to Texas A&M last night and Texas Longhorn recruiting in general, with essentially 2 weeks to go until National Signing Day, 2 weeks from tomorrow, as a matter of fact, if I'm doing the math correctly. Mr. Richardson, how are you on this Tuesday?
And I'm doing good. You know, Christmas trees are been up, you know, the house is decorated. You know, we are in this weird December thing where I'm not worried about a bowl game. So I'm just sitting back and eating my popcorn and watching LSU make moves, or OU/USC. And of course, last night was Evan Stewart, which was a different move, but lots of watching going on.
Yeah, give me an idea. When you heard the news yesterday, we can both do this. Your initial instant reaction to the news that five-star wide receiver Evan Stewart, a guy that you and I have loved. I mean, you and I were talking about Evan Stewart potentially being the #1 player in the state of Texas way before everybody else kind of caught on to that. I mean, at 6'1", 175, and with his athleticism and speed, he's just a different cat. Your initial thoughts?
Well, you know, it wasn't a huge, surprise, to me, Ketch. You know, Evan Stewart, when you talked about his tape and stuff, he reminded me a little bit of, what was it, Garrett Wilson? Remember his tape coming out of Lake Travis, where you were just like, whoa, this guy is freaking good. And Evan Stewart was like that. But the only thing why it didn't surprise me, Ketch, and, you know, we had a private conversation about this on Slack, but I've noticed that in my time span, guys who are committed to a program and then decommit, I feel like the percentages of them going back to the same program are usually pretty small. I've seen rare exceptions as I follow recruiting and seeing guys like they kind of get a wishy-washy a little bit. But usually guys, when they like cut bait loose and they're like, yeah, we'll keep talking. You know, that's usually not the best sign, and at least in my thing. So I wasn't really surprised or shocked. I think Jason Sukamel said that Evan Stewart went out there, or maybe it was on an unofficial, potentially when A&M beat Alabama, which you and I had talked about on this channel would be probably a huge for recruiting for all of them and being that atmosphere. Because after that, anything that happens, you can say, hey, we lost, and this is why we need you. We won. This is how you can add to it. Look at the guys we can do. So I'm sure Evan Stewart goes in there and thinks, man, I can go ahead and turn this thing around, play for, compete, make this team better. So overall, not shocked. I'd like to hear what you thought.
Well, I think my first reaction was, damn, I should have changed my future cast sooner, because I think for the last month or so, the writing had really started to be on the wall. I think, the thing is, Texas was probably the leader in early October. That the thing that Texas had going for it was that there wasn't a true #2 school. So Florida and Alabama were in the top 3 in the summer along with Texas, and both of those schools still thought Texas was the team to beat. So neither of them felt good enough about their position that they thought in a head-to-head they would beat Texas. A&M doesn't really come into his recruitment until this season. And he really takes his first visit to College Station in October. He ends up taking a couple of visits over the course of the last, let's say, 6 weeks or so. And you could just start to see the writing on the wall. And look, I think Texas was hoping that its offense, which is more wide receiver friendly than Jimbo Fisher's at Texas A&M, might be one of the things that would still push that kid to Texas. But this is the sin of going 5-7. If you want to know what this does in recruiting, Texas gets this kid if they go 9-3 this year. That they went 5-7. This kid almost by default just like fate pushed him to A&M. Oh, there's a big game against Alabama, and God, Texas is not looking so hot. Yeah, I'll go check it out. And 2 months later, that kid is an A&M commitment. And my other reaction to this is Texas A&M's recruiting class this year will be the best they've ever had in the history of that program. It's got a chance when this is over with to be the #1 recruiting class in the country. And I don't know that Texas is going to finish in the top 10. So when we talk about A&M didn't even need more than an 8-4 season this year to capitalize on the momentum of finishing top 5 a year ago. And then they were just okay on the field. And okay is good enough when you've got some momentum going. Texas unable to create any momentum this season when they had very little this summer with the truly elite of the elite kids, because the Bryce Andersons of the world and you know, whether it be Cameron Williams or Kelvin Banks, like all of those guys were waiting for someone to either make the move first or for Texas to kind of get something going. And it just never really happened with the top guys. We talked about it throughout the offseason, how important it was for Texas to get some decent momentum. I mean, we were talking about, look, if you're going to get Arch Manning, you got to go 9-3. The idea that this thing would fall into the 5-7 territory makes recruiting really hard right now. Like they're having to recruit around that. And it's not going to be easy. And, you know, there's a bigger conversation to be had beyond the Evan Stewart situation with the Longhorns, now a Texas A&M commitment, as to how this class ends and where Texas goes from here in recruiting. And it's a little bit of a difficult conversation, I think, if you're the Longhorns, because they failed on all the important fronts on the field this season. And now you'll hear, if we'd said before the season, Anwar, what happens if Texas goes 5-7? We would have just laughed. We'd have been like, oh, that's a disaster. You can't recover from that. Now that it's happened, the only thing that's left for people to do is to try to talk themselves around it. Well, now they'll sell early playing time, and they'll say that this is only year one and that they're building towards something. But the narratives change when you go 5-7, and the outcomes often are going to look like what we just saw with Evan Stewart, which is kids are going to like Texas, but the elite of the elite kids aren't risking it right now on Texas until seen otherwise. And look, you still look at the offensive line, and that's still the critical thing in this class, whether it's Devin Campbell or Cam Dewberry or Malik Agbo or, you know, anybody that Cameron Williams, Kelvin Banks, like anybody that they would want to try to get back in on. We know that this class will be defined by how well that offensive line class is. And if they pull some of those guys, it'll be I think a real indicator that this staff maybe does have a little something going on. But I have my doubts about just how possible that is. And, you know, when you and I talked right before we recorded this video, I said, it's not all rainbows and sunshine, I think, on the recruiting front. And I think if we talk about the primary targets left in recruiting for the Longhorns, I think that, you know, it'll come across that there's a lot more uncertainty right now than confidence.
So, you know, as I look at Ketchum on the rivals list here and looking at the guys in the state of Texas who are remaining. So looks like Denver Harris is on top of the list of the uncommitted guys, right? Number 5 is Cam Dewberry. Number 6 is Devin Campbell. Number 9, Harold Perkins out of Cyprus, the linebacker. Omari Abor, hope I'm saying it, out of Duncanville. I'm just going through who it's any of these guys, and there's one other guy in the top 20, Kobe McKenzie, inside linebacker out of Lubbock, who I believe you've talked about, or Jason has. I think you talked about him the other day. Does Texas have the inside track on any of those guys?
Define inside track.
A player that you feel is leaning towards Texas.
I don't know. We talked about Devin Campbell yesterday, who might be the biggest and most important prospect left on the Texas offense in recruiting for them. The offensive line is the most vital and critical need in this class. He is the guy more so than anybody else that Texas has targeted as their number one guy. He's five-star offensive lineman that really has been thought of as a bit of a Texas lean. I think if you were to have, if Vegas had been handicapping his recruitment, I think even through last week, Texas probably is the betting favorite with Oklahoma second. The fact that he's already taken an official visit to USC, really likes USC, and now Lincoln Riley is at USC. And Coach Benenbaugh from Oklahoma, their kind of infamous offensive line coach, it's undecided what's going to happen with him. There's some thought that he will go out to – he has a job offer at USC. There's some thought that he might want to stick around at Oklahoma, but not knowing who the new coach is going to be and what that new coach may want to do with his offensive line position, Benenbaugh could go out to USC, and then that might just eliminate Oklahoma, but then it might make USC a really tough team to beat if you're Texas, because USC will be in a lot of ways selling the same thing that Texas was selling all year long: hope, optimism, building towards something, but they'll be doing it at a location that he may like more than Austin, and with a head coach and an offensive line coach that he really liked at Oklahoma, and all things being equal, may surpass Steve Sarkisian. So I don't know. Like, Devin Campbell's the guy that stands out. It's hard for me. It's funny because Cam Dewberry's a guy that Texas has made up ground on, but made up enough ground to be the leader, the inside track. Certainly couldn't say that. You'd say the same thing about Harold Perkins, a linebacker. That's a kid that has gone out of his way to visit Texas on his own. I mean, he's taken unofficial visits during the season that I think were completely unexpected. But Texas A&M's probably the other school. Texas A&M coming off of a better season with a better recruiting class, with more difference makers, and with a head coach that's a little bit more proven. If Texas wins that guy, it would really be the upset of the year. I think Texas fans would like to feel more optimistic than that, because their chances, I think, are solid. But man, when that kid sits down to make a decision and he starts writing down the list of the do's and the don'ts and the reasons why and the reasons why you won't, I think that Texas really, for a lot of these kids, just didn't do enough on the field this year for them to say that Texas is anything more than the bridesmaid. It's one of the reasons why I think the portal is going to be so important to the success of Steve Sarkisian moving forward, because I don't know that this recruiting class is going to end with the answers that they had hoped to be able to find, certainly 12 months ago, but, or 11 months ago, but even 2 months ago. The Texas hope was that you beat Oklahoma, which they were blowing them away. Finish that game. Who knows what happens from there? Maybe you clean the board up. You're getting Evan Stewart. Maybe you steal Harold Perkins away. Maybe those offensive linemen all agree together that they want to go to the same place, and maybe Texas ends up being that. Texas didn't give itself an opportunity to be that school. And look, it's hard for me the day after Evan Stewart commits to Texas A&M to say anything other than this is what happens when you go 5-7. There will be consequences. A bill always comes due. And last night, Evan Stewart's bill came due and the Longhorns didn't have enough money.
So, I'm looking at the guys who are committed at, I have a, somewhat of a question, as related to and this one, defer for you and your knowledge here. I'm looking at guys who the current 2022 commitment class, right, Ketch? And the one thing that stands out to me as I go by position, I see one wide receiver committed. I see only two linebackers committed at this point. Now they've got a good number of defensive linemen with 5, right? And then of course they got, 3 offensive linemen committed. He said, I think the goal is to get to 5. So we can see how that's going. But what do you make of, Ketch, some of these positions, maybe not having enough linebackers? And you would say, what do you normally want in a receiving class, Ketch? I know one it's got to be more than one, right?
Well, obviously more than one, and they will take more than one. I mean, one of the reasons why they offered a kid last night that had been a former SMU commitment was because they want to take more than one wide receiver in this class. I think that it always comes down to what your scholarship numbers look like before a recruiting class. Texas is loaded with numbers at wide receiver, which we think will break up in this offseason when guys enter the portal and move on. I mean, Steve Sarkisian really only played a few all season long. There were only a couple of guys that he really trusted. So I think this is a wide receiver class where they would like to have 3 or 4. But, Armani Winfield decommits. There was 2. Evan Stewart was a commitment. There was 3. Brendan Thompson is right now kind of the savior at the wide receiver position in this class. They need 2 or 3 more of him. So, if things don't, at this point, the wide receiver class will be a disaster because not landing Evan Stewart makes this thing a bit of a failure. He was the guy you had to get, but they've lost commitments. Right now, they're only left with 1. Presumably, if they stay in state to go get some other high school kids, you're talking about guys with much lower profile, much lower pedigree, and as a byproduct, a lower percentage of potential success rate that accompanies them when they arrive in school. You look at the linebackers, some of that is dictated again by numbers, what's available in the state of Texas. It's not a great linebacker year. You've got kind of Harold Perkins and then a bunch of other guys. Kobe McKenzie may be the second best guy. And look, if you're a Longhorn fan, what's potentially exciting there is that even though Texas is getting in late on Kobe McKenzie, the Oklahoma situation is in such a state of flux that he might be a guy that Texas could steal late. I put in a future cast for him for Texas yesterday, maybe a little premature, but we've been hearing things behind the scenes that the Longhorns think they've got a very good chance there. So much so that it wouldn't shock us if something happened there. They still have time, I think, to address that. But, this thing, when it's all said and done, Harold Perkins is a guy that I think is going to end up at Texas A&M. So if you're talking about 2 huge need areas and Texas A&M takes your cornbread at both of those positions, it's hard to spend that. It's hard to spend all year targeting those 2 guys and then to watch them go to your arch rival and then act like it's not a big deal. It kind of is. Again, what happens with the offensive line situation, I think, is really interesting. They could come out. I don't know. Because proving to a kid that the 5 and 7 team should be the choice is historically a very difficult thing to do. And I've never really seen it at Texas. I've never really seen Texas, when they've dipped into that kind of territory, be able to completely survive in recruiting.